piggyback on that, how many offices can a clerk have set up at the same time?
So I have two responses. First is the idea that by saying in-person delivery to the municipal clerk necessarily means in-person delivery to the clerk's office. And I think that's not what the statute expressly says. And I think that is an important difference because the legislature knew how to specify the clerk's office. And I think you can look at least two other provisions that I've seen in Chapter 6 that specifically reference activity that is supposed to take place at the office of the clerk. And that's 6.86 sub 1 sub A sub 2 and 6.87 sub 3 sub A. And I think both of those statutes expressly refer to the office of the clerk as a place that something needs to happen. And so when 6.87 sub 4B1 simply says delivery in person to the municipal clerk, it doesn't necessarily envision, and I will get to your Honor's question about 6.855, I promise, but okay. I just want to tie off 6.87 here very quickly. So when 6.87 just says delivery in person to the municipal clerk, I think that has to mean there's no specific place as long as the in-person delivery is occurring to either the clerk or an agent of the clerk. And an agent, it just simply has to be okay, given how government operates. So I'd like to then turn to 6.855, which is your Honor's second and Justice Ziegler's second line of questioning about the alternate absentee ballot sites. And I think this one, you really need to look very closely at the language of the statute, because I think what's at issue here, if you examine the language, are sites where you can both request an absentee ballot, vote an absentee ballot, and return the ballot all in the same place. And I think there are at least three places that show you that in the text of that statute. So in the first sentence of 6.855 sub 1 reads that essentially an alternate absentee ballot site is a place where, quote, electors of the municipality may request and vote absentee ballots, and to which voted absentee ballots shall be returned. And I think those and connectors are very important. I mean, they're grammatically critical, and they indicate that these alternate sites are places where all those things need to happen. It has to be requesting, voting, and returning. And if you don't have all three, it's not an alternate ballot site. It doesn't need to be designated by the county board or anyone else.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it's an alternate ballot site either.
Well, I think that's exactly the point, Your Honor. It's not an absentee ballot site. It doesn't. And I would just point to one other piece of the language. Well, I guess let me try that a different way. What I'm saying is it doesn't have to follow the 6.855 procedures because it doesn't have the three attributes of an absentee ballot.
You can't provide a ballot as well as collect.
Right. And that's not what happens at Democracy in the Park. There was no ballots given out.
But you know what? They were. My concern is that this is early voting. Okay, it happened way before October 20th when in-person early voting could start. Here, people brought their ballots. Somebody witnessed the ballots for them, and they collected the voted ballots. It's very much the same thing that applies if you do in-person voting. When you go within the provision about 2 weeks before the election, I think, when you go there, you get your ID checked, you get a ballot, you vote it, it's witnessed, and it's collected all at once. I understand that they didn't provide ballots, but the people still voted them with a witness, and the ballots were gone. Their vote was done at that point.
So Your Honor, I have two responses. First is that I think the lack of ballots being given out is really crucial here, because that is an essential element of how the legislature has defined in-person absentee voting.
Let me ask you this question. Just say there's an elector and he gets a ballot, but he doesn't know anybody. He lives all by himself. So a week before the election, he goes into the clerk's office and says, I want to vote, but I don't have anybody to be my witness. Would you be my witness? Clerk says, sure. So he votes and he gives it to the clerk. Has he voted?
Well, he's certainly voted, but not in the sense that that had to happen at a designated alternate.
But he voted in person, correct? He voted in person, just like the people who got their ballots sent to them and brought them to Democracy in the Park. He did the same thing, and that was the vote. He voted.
So I think what Your Honor is really focusing on is the witnessing portion as being, troubling to Your Honor. And
well, it's critical to have a ballot that is a valid ballot that's cast, right?
Well, that's absolutely right.
Sure.
But what I would say is that, in-person absentee voting is not a colloquial term. It's a precise term used by the statutes. And so, the fact that, and I think you have to look at 6855, because I really think 6855 tells you when a place that you are, doing some voting related activity at, for lack of a better phrase, I could have come up with something more articulate, but when it needs to be something that is designated in the procedure set out in 6855. And because there's no giving out of ballots, I think it doesn't need to follow those procedures. And I think all it needs to do is satisfy 6.874B1, which just requires in-person delivery. And so the last thing I'd say is, if it's the witnessing portion that's concerning to Your Honor, that did not happen for all these ballots at Democracy in the Park. I mean, many of these
happened for some and not others. It's something I didn't know about till I read the record and the affidavit that's in there.
That's true, Your Honor, but if you take away witnessing, which certainly is not every ballot at issue here, some of the ballots were simply dropped off.
Right.
They were filled out, they were sealed, signed, delivered, witnessed by your wife or husband or whoever else lives at home with you.
I understand.
And then dropped off. And some of the ballots in that bucket fit into that category. And so I
frankly don't see the difference between my example of the guy that gets a ballot at home and doesn't have anybody to witness him and goes into the clerk's office and has them witness it and gives it to the clerk, and the person that does the same thing in Madison in the Park.
My only response I can give you, I see my time is up.
You can finish just that question though.
Sure. The only thing I can say is I think if you look at 687-4B1, if you don't meet the criteria under 6855 for an alternate absentee ballot site, if you don't fall under that provision, all you have to do is satisfy 687-4B1. And I think in-person hand delivery to an agent of the clerk is enough. And I know I'm out of time. I would just say indefinite confinement. There's no proof of a single voter, which I think the court recognizes that didn't qualify for that status. And so there's just no basis to throw out a single vote in that category. So with that, if there are no further questions, I'll turn it over to my co-counsel, Mr. Devaney.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your time.
Attorney Devaney, are you ready to proceed?